What you're about to watch is the almost uncut version of Soul Roadmap podcast. You'll hear hilarious mishaps, awkward silences, and the occasional swear word, so be forewarned. You can hear the streamlined version at dinacataldo.com/iTunes. My name's Dina Cataldo, lawyer, coach, and entrepreneur. I created Soul Roadmap to bring you tips and strategies to live life better. During this episode, you'll hear references to different topics and books of interest. I've linked to those in the show notes. The link for that is below this video. Let's get started. Well, hi, Caitlin. How are you doing?
Hi, I'm great. Thank you. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks. Thank you for joining me this morning. I really appreciate it. I was intrigued with you when I read just a bit about you and a book that you wrote that's Drink Less, Be More. Mm-hmm. And, given the fact that I work with a lot of people who are, in these high stress environments, they're professionals, mostly lawyers. I know that they reach for alcohol on a regular basis, a lot of them, and it's part of the culture. So I learned a little bit about you, and I'm hoping that you can introduce yourself to our audience today.
Yeah. So hi, thank you. And hi to everyone who's listening. And it's really great. It's really great to have the opportunity to have these conversations, because I myself was also in a very high stress driven position for a lot of years, which actually led to a burnout. I often refer to it now as crashing and burning. And I know how, I know how it can be to be completely kind of just in a certain lifestyle and maybe have an inner voice telling you that it's not working for you anymore. And yet when you look around you, it's kind of what you're surrounded by, and it's hard to know what the options are. And that certainly was true for me for many years. And it was the world that I lived until, as I said, I kind of burnt out from it, and then found a new path, studied holistic health and nutrition. And even as I was studying and gaining this knowledge, the alcohol piece was the hardest one for me to sort out for myself, because I had, since the time I was 15, when I started drinking, and it had always been a way to escape, a way to turn off my busy brain, a way to relax, to have fun, to connect. Then over the years, with the stress of my job, it was sometimes I'd drink every night. Sometimes it was just drinking to excess on the weekends. Through the hardest periods, it was certainly like, I kind of just didn't know how to turn off without it. And I was traveling a lot for work. It would be like on airplanes, in airport lounges, at conferences, at events, and there's always alcohol around. And what was really interesting is that when I started trying to make these changes, as I said, I was kind of shifting focus and studying yoga and nutrition and slowing down and challenging my work identity a little bit of having to work, push all the time. And I knew that I wanted to change my relationship to alcohol, and I just couldn't seem to get a handle on it. And that, even in and of itself, was so hard for me, because I'm like, I can do so many things. I'm very accomplished. I'm ambitious. I put my mind to something and I do it. Why can't I figure this out? And I realized that for women like us, we don't have a model of how to do this in a way that feels really authentic to many of us. So I knew I wasn't an alcoholic. I had gone to recovery type programs. I'd sort of stepped in the rooms at meetings, and it just didn't feel like for me. And I'd gone to see a therapist, and I see the value of therapy, but it wasn't exactly the right fit either. And so I was searching. And I actually had this kind of divine download. I was walking down the beach one day that was like, you need to write a book for women about alcohol. And I was sort of like, but I haven't figured it out yet. But, I did. And over the years of really kind of digging in deep and realizing that I wanted to find a way that felt authentic to me to redefine my relationship to alcohol, and then to support other women to do the same, it evolved into what is now a holistic lifestyle and health coaching practice, and the book Drink Less Be More: How to Have a Great Night and Life Without Getting Wasted. And we can go into more details around that as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. I really appreciated a different perspective on alcohol abuse, because what you had described when I was learning more about you was not just you drink a lot of alcohol and therefore you are an alcoholic. It was, I drink a lot of alcohol and I enjoy alcohol, but I'm using it in a way that it does not serve me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm hoping that you'll share with us your thoughts surrounding a spectrum of alcohol abuse.
Yeah. And I love that you use that word spectrum, because it really is. And I think it's problematic that in our culture, we often see things as very black and white. It's either everything's a-okay, you're drinking normally, there's no problem here, or then you have a problem. And if you have a problem, then you're probably an alcoholic. And we know what happens then. You can never drink alcohol again. And I actually believe that that is very detrimental and actually causes harm, because a lot of people don't go and seek out help because they're afraid that they're going to be told that they can never drink again. And intuitively, many of us know that we can learn how to moderate, or that we can, there's a small voice inside of us that sometimes we don't even really want to believe, because we've tried and failed before, or what we've tried in the past hasn't worked. But there's this part of us that knows that, wait a second, if I can have a drink in a certain environment, why shouldn't I be able to have a drink in another environment? Or, does that mean that I'm an alcoholic when I, yes, certainly do drink to excess in certain situations, or I'm drinking really habitually, but I actually know that I could stop. I'm just not doing it. And so what we commonly think of as alcoholism, which is now, in the medical profession and according to the DSM, which is the Diagnostic Manual for Mental Health and Related Disorders, alcoholism isn't even used in that as a diagnosis anymore. It's severe alcohol use disorder. So it actually is a spectrum of moderate to severe alcohol use disorder. And alcohol use disorder is often what we think of when we think, when we see the celebrities in the news, when we hear about people who just, their lives completely unravel, they go on benders, they can't ever stop after one drink, their lives become unmanageable, they lose jobs, they lose families, they lose, just everything falls apart. That would be at the severe end of the spectrum. And the mild to moderate is where we find ourselves drinking more than we want to. A lot of the time, we find ourselves drinking more than what is the government recommended amount, which is not very much, actually. So, between 1 to 2 drinks for women, no more than like 4 days a week. And what's considered a binge is more than 4 drinks in one sitting for a woman. So if you're consistently doing that, you might fall into the mild to kind of to moderate alcohol use disorder. But it also is then combined. So there's this sort of physiological effects of alcohol that are pretty much consistent across the board, right? 4 drinks of alcohol a day is going to physiologically affect my body in a very similar way to it will affect yours. But the kind of the social implications might be very different. I might be functioning and being able to hold down a job and have a relationship and all of these other things. So that's where there's a little bit of gray area on the spectrum. And often it comes through conversations with a doctor or a specialist to help you identify exactly where on the spectrum you are. But for the most part, the majority of us are not physically dependent on alcohol. So there's actually a very small percentage, according to the Center for Disease Control, it's around 10 to 15% of people that have what we consider to be like that addictive gene, that chemical difference, which is that if I have a sip or a drink of alcohol, it's very, very difficult for me to stop there. And that is true for some people. And those people who experience that, unfortunately, are always going to struggle with moderation. It doesn't mean that they can't do it, but that like internal struggle that you often hear about of like, I'm going to do it. I'm going to have that one drink, but I'm going to white knuckle it through the rest of the night. Like I'm going to be thinking about it, obsessing about it. It's, you know, that unfortunately is a chemical difference that's in some people's brains, and it's very difficult for, like, it doesn't really go away. So you can manage it, but it's tiring and it's consuming and it's exhausting. And so this approach of what I call now redefining sobriety, redefining your relationship to alcohol for that small percentage of the population is going to be a challenge. And choosing abstinence or being alcohol free might be the better option for peace of mind, for not having so much energy consumed to be trying to figure out how to moderate and in which situations and which are going to be more triggering and all of that. But that aside, that's, 85 to 90% of the population who are people who may struggle with alcohol at times, but who don't have that chemical imbalance in their brains and who can learn how to moderate with support. And so some of my clients, that's their goal. They want to learn how to moderate. They, in their heart of hearts, when they get quiet with themselves and think about it, or when I ask them, it's often one of the first questions I ask people is, if you could wave a magic wand and you could have your ideal relationship to alcohol, what would it look like? And they'll often say, well, I would love to be able to share a bottle of wine or a glass of wine with my husband, or I'd like to know that I can go out with a group of girlfriends and have a cocktail and enjoy it and have that be that. That there's certain circumstances in their life where they really feel like they'd like to be able to have that glass or that drink. And they also know that alcohol is causing them issues in other aspects of their life. And so that's what we end up working on a lot is then, well, okay, so if you're habitually drinking every night and that's your way of turning off your brain and your stress relief and your reward, because many of us use it as a reward at the end of the day, what can we then shift in your life so that you are fulfilling those needs in other ways, so that then ultimately you can have your ideal relationship to alcohol, which is that it's kind of like a silver lining. Sometimes it's like it enhances a meal a little bit, or a culinary experience, or a connection with someone, but that it's not the main event, and that that you have all of these other tools and resources that you can use in your daily life.
I really like what you're saying, because I think in our culture in particular, it is very easy for adults to teach children, just don't drink.
Mm-hmm.
And the solution for not being able to handle yourself in a social situation with alcohol is do not drink. But you're actually, excuse me. You're actually providing tools to them, which I think would be really beneficial if that were something that were taught us at a younger age. Because at least my experience is I learned about alcohol in college because, of course, I was watched like a hawk by my parents, and I may have experimented a little bit, but college was really where I learned. And college is a whole nother level when it comes to drinking alcohol. I mean, that is something where it's a party culture. And because one group of people does it, people feel like they should be doing it too. And then when I went to law school, every single event was structured around alcohol. I mean, even school-sponsored events, especially school-sponsored events, they were fundraisers, they were events that had alcohol involved, and there were actually security guards that were posted to make sure that we didn't drink and drive, so that we didn't hurt our career moving forward. So it was very, very alcohol-based in terms of how they structured our social interactions. And none of that included any tools that you could use to change up exactly what you were doing, around alcohol. Can you explain some of the things that you tell your clients around some alcohol alternatives?
Yeah. Yeah, and that's such a great point because the majority of us weren't taught how to drink responsibly. So either we have a scenario like what you described, which is that our parents are strict, or our parents, they themselves don't have the healthiest relationship to alcohol, so we're not having that modeled, or the decision making around it modeled in our home, or then we immerse ourselves in a college environment or a professional environment where, as you said, it's the norm to drink in a certain way and often to excess. And it's usually just like, drink as much as you want, but don't get in trouble kind of thing.
Right.
Like you said, don't drink and drive, you know? So some of them are super, super basic, and they almost seem like, I don't want anybody to listen to this to feel hard on themselves for not having thought about this, because they were almost like this revelation to me of, why didn't I think of that? And again, I think when we're really, really intelligent people as we are, then sometimes we can be really hard on ourselves when we've repeated patterns unconsciously,
Sure.
and feel stuck in a certain area of our lives. So I don't want anybody listening to this to feel like, why didn't I think of that myself? Because again, it's not something that we really have modeled to us. And we really do go on autopilot a lot, or we learn something at a certain age and then don't really question it for a lot of years. And so really simple ones, that again seem really simple, but it's funny because the majority of us don't do this, is to something that I call arrive and assess. So when you get somewhere, we often are in the habit of, if we're walking into a bar, or if, let's say, it's an event and there's champagne being passed around or whatever it is, you reach for the glass, or you beeline for the bar, or you sit down at your table and you open up the drinks menu. That's just autopilot. We all do it, right? So it's arrive and assess and allow at least half an hour before you order or consume your first alcoholic drink. So what I do often is I'll drink a glass of water. And it's the perfect thing too to say when you're arriving somewhere. I do this all the time now. I'll just say, actually, I'm really thirsty. Could I have a glass of water? I can't even think about what I want to drink yet until I have some water. I just need to hydrate. Like, nobody's going to question that. And it buys you time. You then have a chance to settle into how you're feeling and how you feel in the space, and whether drinking within the first half an hour is in your best interest, or maybe you want to hold off a little bit. It's really interesting just to start checking in with yourself and allowing yourself to have that break, or the space between when you arrive somewhere and when you start drinking. It prolongs your first drink. So then you're that much kind of behind where everybody else is without anybody noticing. It's just a really, really basic, but what I've found to be very helpful way of checking in with yourself. Postponing the time of your first drink, hydrating, which is really important. You can also, and this is something I started doing a lot, we're really fortunate in this time that we're in. There's so many craft cocktails, infusions, syrups, different ingredients, and those make fantastic mocktails. And so a lot of restaurants, and again, we often just don't think to look, they have now a mocktail section. A lot of them will have like a couple of craft mocktails, or you can look at the cocktail list and say, "Ooh, that like lavender infused syrup sounds really good," and just say, I'm still really thirsty. Can you make me something like this, but without the alcohol? Or can you use a couple of these ingredients? And most bartenders now love to do that. They love to be creative. They like doing something different. And I've never, ever had anybody complain or act annoyed that I've asked them to make me something different based on some of the ingredients on the menu. It's like they usually want to show off their skills. So, and then you can say, I love the way this looks, but not too sweet, please, or whatever, so that's a really great way. The other thing is that, and this is neurologically true, is that if we leave our decision making to the moment, we will often slide back into what we're most familiar with.
Yes.
So I always recommend making a plan before you go out. So not leaving it like, oh, I just don't want to drink as much tonight. Or we often focus on what we don't want. Okay, I don't want to get drunk. I don't want to make an ass out of myself. I don't want to wake up the next morning and not remember what's going on. I don't. And we don't really create this vision of what we do want. So I'll recommend often taking some time. You're getting ready, you're doing your makeup, take those moments to yourself to focus on what you do want out of the evening, what kind of connections you want to make, how you want to feel. Like, how does it feel to move through the room with confidence? How do you want to feel at the end of the night when you get home and you realize, wow, I just had an amazing time and I only had 2 drinks? How are you going to feel the next morning when you wake up full of energy, having had a great night of sleep, remembering everything that happened the night before? Really focus on what you do want and what the positive outcomes of drinking less would be. And then know that, also check in with yourself. So I know that if I drink more than 2 drinks, it's going to be harder for me to say no to the third. Then in your plan for the evening that you're going to drink 2 or less. And so then you kind of plan out, okay, so I get there, I'm going to have a drink of water, then I'm going to order a mocktail, then I'll have a drink, then I'll have another water, then I'll have another drink, then that's that. Or I had another client, for example, she just knew that any drinks after, I think it was even quite early, which always surprised me, but she was in New York and worked in finance, and they would do a lot of happy hour kind of things. And she sort of knew that any drink for her past 9 or 10 p.m. was just kind of like, she realized she just didn't want to be with alcohol in her system. It would affect her sleep. It would be hard for her to get up early and work out in the morning.
Yeah.
And so for her, it was just, she'd put a cap on. So maybe it would be 1 drink, maybe it would be 2, but not past a certain time in the evening. So, it will vary from person to person, but really thinking it through in advance and deciding with clarity what you're going to do will really, really help in the moment, because we're creatures of habit and we slide back onto autopilot and make our decisions unconsciously. So it's happened so fast and so easily. And then especially if we're in a situation where we feel triggered, which again is not usually a conscious thing, but if we're feeling under stress, or we're nervous, or we're tired, or we're, cranky, or whatever it is, it's that much easier for us just to go back into what we know and what we know has worked in the past. So it does require a bit of planning in the beginning, but it's really worth it if you are wanting to change your relationship to alcohol. And focusing on what the positive outcome is going to be will also really help with any sort of feeling of deprivation or lack, or I'm going to miss out. It's like, no, actually I'm gaining energy and clarity and feeling proud about myself and my decisions, and, better quality sleep, and, all the things that I'm gaining from making these choices, as opposed to what I might be lacking, if that makes sense.
That makes sense to me. That makes a lot of sense to me. I was thinking about how a lot of people that I have seen who seem to drink a lot, they usually are doing it to numb something. And I'm not saying, the times when you're going out with your girlfriends and you're having a couple drinks. I mean, when it is 1 drink after another, after another, after another.
Yeah.
And I have noticed that most often happens in situations where they have just come back from work, whatever they're doing, and it's almost like what you were saying, they can't help themselves because it's so ingrained, they just keep drinking. And I haven't noticed it as much with women as I have with men, but I have noticed that. Mm-hmm. Is there like a fundamental difference between how women use alcohol and men use alcohol? Do you have any experience with that?
Well, I think that certainly up until very recently, it has been much more socially acceptable for men to drink, and to drink a lot. So women still tend to be more secretive about the amount that they're drinking. It's not kind of as much, although this has changed a bit. It's not so much the badge of honor, of how much you can drink. And also there's more permission for women to share their feelings and their emotions, and to have that kind of emotional support. And so I really see men struggling often, where if I have a really stressful day, I'm more likely to be able to reach out to a friend or a family member, a partner, whomever, and be honest about like the heart of the feeling, whereas men will keep that pent up and don't really express themselves. And some of my male clients have often said, and what's been very challenging for them around starting to cut back or stop drinking, is that that's the only time sometimes when they're drunk with their colleagues or with their guy friends on a guy's weekend where they can have a heart to heart. Sometimes for men, the only time they really give themselves that permission to express their feelings, whether they be negative feelings or positive feelings, like the I love you, bro, like I love you, man, like I'm not trying to minimize that at all, like that's real for some men. That's the only time when they say those words, is when they're drinking with their friends. So that's I think a very those were the first that came to mind. So the cultural conditioning we have around alcohol, and then the fact that just men have a harder time reaching out for emotional support and expressing their feelings, which really ties into the amount that they keep drinking. And I think you bring up also a really good point, as the majority of my clients are women, although I do work with men sometimes, but there's sort of a concurrent work that needs to happen, which is on one side, and my book helps with this, and certainly this is part of what we talk about, but it's the strategy. So it's the what do I do in the X situation? How do I set my intentions? How do I then follow through on my intentions? What is my strategy going to be tonight? What are my drink alternatives? And and having that toolkit, so to speak. Concurrent to that is it's like if you look at it like an iceberg, what I just described is sort of the above water part of the iceberg. And that's often why people come to me or they buy my book, is that I want to know how, show me how to, and then the below water part of the iceberg is really, where are my emotions at? How am I letting my head run the show or my heart? Do I have emotional support? What is my relationship to stress in my life? How do I manage stress in my life? Do I give myself permission to take a break? Why or why not? What is my work ethic? Why is it like that? Where did that come from? What does it say about me if I take a break? It's really the identity piece of how we come to be the people that we are, and why alcohol continues to show up in our lives in the way that it does. And then it's actually, so I talk about changing our relationship to alcohol, but really it's about changing our relationship to ourselves. And we talk about redefining sobriety and redefining what sobriety means for each of us. It's also redefining our relationship to ourselves, to our work ethic, learning. For me, I didn't know how to take a break. I would push myself so hard that the only days that I really gave myself permission to kind of do nothing were the days that I was too hungover to do anything other than eat crap food and like watch Netflix. But this was probably pre-Netflix. We're so used to saying that now, that watch something.
We were watching DVDs online, or right? something.
Yeah, exactly. But it was, I didn't know how to take a break. I didn't know how to ease up on myself. And so alcohol was my way to do that. It was my permission to turn my brain off at night. It was my permission to do things that I didn't know how to give myself permission to otherwise in the nightlife space. But also it was my permission to have a do nothing day, which I didn't know how to do, without being too hungover to do anything, like to not, so I'd be like, oh yeah, today's a write-off. But then I'd beat myself up about it too.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't feel proud of that. I would act like it in the moment, or we'd go out for a boozy brunch and be like, well, I guess, I guess we know how this day is going to end, kind of thing. And then, and And that was the only way that myself, and not just myself, because it was the other, my colleagues or my friends, that was our downtime. And
Right.
then we go hard again on Monday, and it was like, well, we've got to like basically pay penance for what we just did on Saturday and Sunday. So now it's like up extra early, training for that half marathon, go, 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 still having the drinks to unwind at the end of the night, like push, 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 until the next 2 or 3 weeks later, the next do nothing day happened. But it was never, I didn't know how to, like, self-care for me was a very, like, I didn't even know those words for a long time.
It's so interesting that you say that, because I've had that same experience too. You go out for brunch and you have to call the day right off, and yeah, you're really proud of it at the time. You're like, hey, this is great. Isn't day drinking the best? And then you don't get anything done that you knew that you wanted to get done to reach your bigger goals.
Mm-hmm.
And you beat yourself up about it. There's all that shame surrounding it,
Yeah.
because you did not exercise the self-control or the discipline to do what you really wanted, to create that thing you really wanted to create. And another thing that was coming to mind as you were speaking is I was really curious about what some of your clients' tipping points were, like that point when they recognized, okay, look, there's something here. I'm not sure what it is, but I do feel that maybe I'm drinking a little too much. And maybe that will key in anyone who might be listening to maybe recognize some signs that they might want to take a look at this in their life.
That's such a good question. And I also want to talk about the brunch thing, and I think it will tie into that question as well. So I also want to say, there's nothing wrong with having a boozy brunch.
Right.
And it's about how you feel about it.
Mm-hmm.
So if you like, actually, as we were talking about, I'm like, I have not had one of those in a really long time, and there's actually a certain appeal to it right now. But this is the difference. The difference for me would be that it would be a very intentional choice at this point. It'd be something, it'd be like, you know what? I haven't done this in a really long time, and it's summer and it's beautiful. It's patio season. I just kind of want to do that. Like, I want to have a Sunday where I go and I have some drinks in the daytime, and, and I go to the park after and I enjoy it, but it's a conscious choice and I feel good about it. And this is the beauty of redefining sobriety and redefining your relationship to alcohol, is that might be a goal of yours. And that's a beautiful part of your vision to work towards. If you want to get to a place where you can have that bougie brunch, like once in however, whatever feels good for you, and that's part of your self-care plan and it's intentional, then great. Like, that's beautiful if that's part of what you want for yourself. And I think how that leads into the second part in your question is that shame piece, and that, are you showing up for yourself in your best possible way? And is this your best yes? I talk about that a lot. So we form so many habits that are so unconscious, and we also hold ourselves to a certain standard that often it's like, wait a second, where is this even coming from? Is this really for me? Or is it because of how I think I should be? Or is it because somebody told me that it means a certain thing if I take a day off, or I take it? Like, I remember a client, for her, the biggest deal was what was it? She was a high achiever, high earner. Her salary basically supported her household and their 3 kids. Her husband didn't make as much money as her. She felt this enormous amount of pressure. And for her, part of her self-care plan that we came up with was taking, I think it was a Wednesday morning off and going to the beach for 2 hours. Like, for her, when we started working together, that was almost such an out there suggestion that in the middle of the week, she would stop everything, block out that time in her work schedule so nobody could schedule meetings for her. The kids were at school, her husband was, I don't know, and she would go and just go to the beach and read a book that was not a self-development book. Like, that was such a symbol of taking care of herself and prioritizing herself and saying, you know, you deserve a break just because you work hard, because you do all these things, not because she was often, that was her thing too. It's like, well, the break would come after they'd had a barbecue and this and that and the other thing. And then Sunday rolls around. It's like, you know, but meanwhile, there's like all this stuff piling up and the laundry and, you know, it doesn't really end. And so she would use alcohol as an escape from the amount of pressure that she had on her, but then it would add to the pressure.
Right.
And so for her, taking these mornings off, or then she started booking spa appointments, and she started incorporating self-care into her week in a significant way. So she didn't need to escape from her life the same way on the weekends, because she had been honoring herself and taking care of herself during the week, which was unfathomable. Like, just couldn't even conceive of it when we first started working together. So if you're listening to this, you know, I would ask yourself, do you feel great every day when you wake up in the morning about what happened the day before and the night before? And if you're feeling super awesome about your choices all the time as they relate to alcohol, then you probably don't need to make any changes. Or maybe you are drinking a certain amount consistently, but unless you're really feeling like it's a problem in your life, then you're probably not going to want to change anyway. So it doesn't really matter what I say, you know? So I could say, are you drinking more than 2 drinks a day, you know, 5 days a week? Or do you consistently drink more than 4 drinks a night? You know, which is considered a binge, which I used to think that was crazy. I'm like, what are they talking about?
I know, right?
4 drinks
I got 5 in me at least.
Right? That's like, so, you know, if you're listening to this and that seems crazy to you as well, like, I get it. I was there too. It might feel like a really big shift from where you're at right now to what I'm talking about. And if that's the case for you, then maybe just seeing what 1 less drink a night feels like for you, or even half a glass less a night feels like to start with. You know, if you know that you're pushing the upper limits of what's recommended for low risk drinking, you know, and this is where we're talking about low risk, so that you're reducing your risk of cancer, of heart disease, of dementia, Alzheimer's, like all of these fairly serious health concerns that come along with drinking an elevated amount consistently or regularly binging, which is drinking more than 4 drinks in a sitting. So you might want to, if it seems really far off, to think about cutting back as much as I'm talking about, just do a small tapered approach. Maybe try one day a week that you're not drinking, you know, and start there and see what that feels like. Or start with 1 less drink a night when you're going out with your colleagues or your friends or whomever. And, you know, you usually drink 4 or 5, try 3, you know, and see what that feels like. And if that is consistently challenging for you, then I would definitely recommend considering, if you're ready to consider, reaching out for some more professional support around that. Some of you might be drinking way less than that, and yet you're waking up feeling in the morning. Like, I did it again. I didn't even want to drink last night. And how did I end up drinking 3? Or I was only going to drink 1 or 2. And or I blacked out again, or whatever it is. This is the thing, is that, you know, and I have a lot of women who come to me saying, like, other people in my life don't think this is a problem. But I'm not feeling great about it. I know that I'm not living my best. Yes. You know, I know in my heart of hearts, my intuition is telling me that there's another way for me to be. Like, that this like feeling, or bloated, or just tired or lethargic, like feeling like you're crawling through the fog in the morning. You know, do I want to continue with this? So it can be a very individual decision, because somebody just reached out to me the other day. If you saw her on paper with the amount that she's drinking, you would not, and a doctor would not say that she has a problem with alcohol, you know, and yet she knows that she's not showing up at her best for herself. And what she, you know, you mentioned what we want to achieve in our life, and our, you know, for her, she feels out of alignment. And it was hard, because her husband's saying, what are you talking about? Like, you barely drink, you know, and her friends and the people that they go to breweries and things like that, you know, they're like, you know, we never see you drunk anymore, so what's the big deal? But for her, she didn't feel great about the choices she was making and why she was choosing to drink more and when it would happen, and it would sneak up on her often. So she felt out of alignment, that the amount that she was drinking and when and how it would have impact her didn't feel in alignment with how she wanted, like the complete way that she wanted to show up in the world, if that
Right.
makes sense.
It totally makes sense. That
Yeah.
totally makes sense. And I've had those experiences where I had red wine instead of white wine, and the red wine does something with my sleep now if I drink it too late.
Mm-hmm.
So I can't drink red wine late at night.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just recognizing those little things that don't make you feel good. And when you don't feel good and you're not feeling right, it's important to take note and then address it. Because if you don't, then it's just going to repeat itself.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that too, because again, that's what's the beauty about this approach of redefining sobriety being so individual, is that really a lot of it is about asking yourself questions and learning strategies that can then, so I want to get better night's sleep. Well, it's actually scientifically proven that, and you might have noticed it more with red wine, but any alcohol within an hour, it's before going to sleep, is going to interrupt your REM sleep. So you are not going to go into that deep restorative sleep, and you're going to wake up feeling less rested. So even just making shifts like that, like, okay, so I'm going to go out and I'm going to share a bottle of wine with my partner or whatever it is. But I know that after, you know, if I want to be asleep by 11, that I'm not going to have another drink. You know, I'm going to make sure that finish drinking 9:30, 10 kind of thing. I'm going to hydrate a lot before going to bed, and I'm going to increase my quality of sleep. And these all sort of have these positive, it's like a positive upward spiral when we start to feel more in control and empowered around the choices that we're making. So again, it's not about restriction or self-punishment or taking away these things that actually for many of us bring us pleasure, you know, but it's about learning how to be in relationship to that thing in a way that is healthier and more aligned with our health goals, with our mental, emotional, physical, spiritual goals, you know. And sleep, for example, is so important. And yet we often, myself, I mean, I mentioned this earlier, I drank to sleep. So, which was just this self-defeating habit, that I thought that I needed alcohol to unwind and to put me in that kind of numbed out, sleepy state.
Yeah.
But I was then having a really, really horrible sleep as a result.
Well, you mentioned that, but also people who are depressed, they feel they should drink more and then they'll feel better and they'll be happier. But alcohol is a depressant. And so it's just going to encourage those same feelings of feeling low.
Yeah. Yeah. And also I work with, and I myself have struggled with anxiety, and I work with a lot of women who struggle with anxiety. And it's also very true for anxiety that we drink to help. We think we're helping our anxiety. And in the moment, at the very initial stage of intoxication, it does feel like things are momentarily easier. But neurologically and biochemically, we're actually exacerbating the problem in terms of the chemical imbalances that we're experiencing in our brains. And so that's where also learning how to take care of ourselves differently, learning how to relate to other people, even, you know, being able to say no, being able to be like, actually, is this social event really what I need to go do right now? If I'm feeling this much stress and anxiety about getting out of my house again, you know, getting dressed up or going out or doing this thing, is it really what I need to be doing right now? You know, sometimes it's just about making different choices too, about how we're spending our time. And if we're feeling maxed out and exhausted and depleted, and the idea of being in a social situation and making small talk and then making small talk without as much alcohol is just like completely stressing you out, then maybe just don't go, you know? And it's not about becoming a hermit or cutting yourself off, but it's also really about honoring yourself and understanding, or like, okay, I'm going to go for a little bit, but I'm going to set the timer, you know? And I know that I'm going to go show up and say hi to everybody. And then I'm going to conveniently have to go do something else that, you know, whatever that is. And, even if that's like go home and get in the bath, but, you know, really learning how to honor ourselves and take care of ourselves is really, I think, what's at the core of this. And then when we can consistently start to do that, then what we thought we needed alcohol for often shifts significantly.
You know, all of this discussion that we've had makes me feel that there needs to be an educational component about self-care growing up, especially for people who are high achievers, people who are taught to work really hard. I was never taught self-care as a child. I don't know about you, but I never had any component like that. And that ability to have that quiet time to ourselves, to actually care about ourselves, can get us more in touch with our feelings, our intuition about whether or not something like alcohol or a social event is really serving us and could help us say no when we need to say no.
Yeah, that's so true. I mean, I didn't slow down enough for years to really even know how to, you know, I couldn't, and that might be true for somebody who's listening to this. Like, I don't even know where to start. Like, how do I listen to my intuition? I don't know what my intuition is telling me. And if you'd asked me that 7 or 8 years ago, my answer probably would have been very similar. Like, I don't know, like we might have been looked like you're an alien, you know, I don't know what you're talking about. And I was actually journaling about this yesterday. Like, I pushed myself so hard, and I was so busy all of the time that I really did not know how to slow down and ask myself, or just get quiet with myself, or be like, is this really the best thing for me in the moment? And so that's actually a really, really great place to start. And, you know, even incorporating some sort of daily practice that's even just 5 or 10 minutes to start. And even if that's just sitting there, you know, and instead of drinking your coffee in the morning while scrolling on your phone, you know, keep your phone. I always recommend this too, is, you know, put your phone on airplane mode before you go to bed, you know, if at least half an hour before you go to bed, and then don't turn it back on in the morning, or whatever your version of that is, you know, but don't connect online again until you've had a chance to center yourself, to be with yourself, to check in with yourself. How am I doing today? What do I want out of today? You know, how do I want to feel at the end of the day? What are my gratitudes? You know, doing some sort of little practice, and it doesn't have to be very long, but something that allows you to connect inward with yourself, because we are so quick to be in reactivity mode. And so it's no wonder that by the end of the day, we're so overwhelmed and depleted that we just want to numb out. We just want to shut off, because if from the moment our alarm goes off in the morning, well, that one in and of itself is like pulling me outside of myself, you know, and then it's like, okay. And then I pick up my phone, and then I see all my notifications, and I'm scrolling my phone, and then my kid is over here, and I'm getting breakfast, and I'm doing this, and I'm da, 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 and sending that email, and then I'm commuting, and then I'm listening to something while I commute because I need to multitask, you know, and it's like, and then, you know, come 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock at night, it's like, I like, give me that glass of wine, because I just, you know, I'm maxed. And so, you know, I have another client, for example, again, you know, she was responsible for a lot of the earning in her family. She had 2 small daughters who both had autoimmune health challenges. Her husband then had this crazy car accident and like brain injury. Like, her life was so challenging, and she was still trying to work and take care of everybody. So for her, 10 minutes was like, I can't, you know, she was just like, not possible. So we started with 1-minute meditations.
Yeah.
And like for her, it would be like driving to an appointment or whatever she had to do and sitting in her car, getting there a minute early, you know, or sitting in her car after a meeting or something and waiting for a minute and just like putting the timer and just sitting. And sometimes she would cry, you know, or sometimes she would breathe a sigh of relief, or sometimes she would put on some music, you know, she had little meditations and things that she would do, but she called them minute meditations. And that's all that she could handle. Like anything more than that felt like extra pressure, which is the last thing in the world that she needed.
Right.
And but it helped her feel more in control, you know. So all these other extreme and intense things that happened in her life, and all of these things that took her care was almost 100% for other people. Like that's all she had available was for her young children and her husband and her work and everything. But for her to take back like those minutes at certain times during the day was like, I do matter. This is all I can manage right now, but I'm going to do it. And I'm going to intentionally take this minute just to be with myself right now. And that was huge. And it started, you know, amongst some other things, but to create a big shift for her of sort of taking back control and taking some moments to say, I do matter. I can make this minute about me and only me, you know, and to not have every minute of every day be in reactivity mode, you know. So start where you can. That's what I would suggest too, is that really start where you can. And you know, I feel like we could talk for days about this and our
Oh yeah.
relationship to caring for ourselves, because I agree it's not something that we're taught.
Yeah.
And
Well,
sometimes, you know, it really is like you just carve out the teeniest little moment that you can in your life, but do it. You know, the thing is that start somewhere. And if you take, maybe you're listening and that's what you take from this call, you know, is to like put your timer on for a minute or 5 minutes, you know. And this is the thing too that I say, and this is why so much of this conversation could be for anybody, you know, whether or not you're somebody that has struggled or is struggling with alcohol, because really that's, like I said, that's so much of what it's about. It's about our relationship to ourselves. But what I also say to my clients often is that we think about alcohol as a thing that affects us in the evenings, right? And so it's like, oh, do I take the drink or not in the moment kind of thing. But I always talk about changing our relationship to alcohol or redefining sobriety as it's a 24-hour day affair. And really how you treat yourself and how you take care of yourself in the mornings often has more impact on whether or not you want the drink in the night than whatever strategy you're going to employ in that moment.
oh
You
yeah.
know, that it really is a round the clock affair. And that doesn't mean you're thinking about it or thinking about alcohol when you wake up. Most of us are not thinking about a drink first thing in the morning. However, what you are thinking about or not thinking about, and what you're doing or not doing to take care of yourself has everything to do with how much you might really feel like you need that glass of wine at the end of the day.
Oh my God, yes. Oh my
Mm-hmm.
God, yes. Well, I want to respect your time. This has been fabulous. And I would love if you would share with our listeners a little bit more about where they can get to know you better.
Yeah, so you can go to redefiningsobriety.com and you'll find more about my story, how I got to be where I am today, and also some of the content that I've referenced, both the sort of medical perspectives and just this whole concept of how we are in relationship to ourselves. I had a summit that I hosted early on in 2018. And I interviewed a lot of different experts on this topic of redefining sobriety. And so some are medical doctors who talk about the spectrum of alcohol use disorder. And so they're really interesting interviews around that side of things. Some are talking about self-care, some are talking about anxiety and stress and trauma and sexuality. There's a whole range of topics. So when you go on if you go to my website and you go to the Redefining Sobriety tab, you'll see a variety of different options. And one of them is the expert interview series. So it is available for purchase. And I'd say if this topic is interesting for you, there's 25 interviews plus bonus materials. Like every speaker gave a gift as well. So there's like a ton of resources on this topic. And I'd say if you're curious, go there and check it out, and just kind of, it's like conversations like this, but each one is focused on around a certain element of our relationship to alcohol, and the idea of redefining it for ourselves. And so I would invite you to check that out if you're interested. You can also read more about my book. I also have a self-study program, which is an 8-week program that walks you through with weekly videos and content around a lot of the information that I share with my private clients, but you can try it out for yourself at home as well. And then I always just love connection. And so really my connection calls are one of my favorite things that I do. And so feel free, you'll also on my website see how you can set up a session with me. And honestly, do it. I love to connect, whether or not you think you want to work privately, or if you just have questions around some of my offerings or anything that we've talked about today, please do feel free to reach out, because I just love to have these conversations. As you can see, I
love that you call them connection calls.
Good. Like,
I love that. I love that.
Yeah.
I'll be sure to link to everything that you just mentioned in
Perfect.
the show notes, so everyone will have access to them.
Great.
Well, thank you so much for joining me this morning. This has been really great.
Thank you. It was really an honor. And I'm so grateful that you're taking this conversation to your audience, because I don't think that it happens often enough. And so when you reached out to me around doing this interview, I was just so grateful and appreciative. And I think, I just think it's really important for us to have a safe space where we feel like we can share. I know for a long time I didn't have that. And so if anything, I hope that our conversation today has, maybe provided some new insights, but also just made it more comfortable to have this conversation.
Yeah, this is not a conversation that I have really heard before. And so I imagine that a lot of people have not heard this perspective. So I'm really glad you're doing the work that you're doing. It's fantastic.
Thank you so much.
All right. Well, you have a wonderful day.
Thanks. You too.
Oops. If you like this uncut treasure, be sure to hit like below and subscribe so you can get more of them. If you want to hear the streamlined version, be sure to go to dinacataldo.com/iTunes and subscribe so you hear about them every week.